She returned his love letters unopened. 10 years later, he made her read every one. The carriage wheels ground to a halt on the rain-slicked cobblestones of Curzon Street, and Lady Rosalind Blackmore pressed her gloved hand against the fogged window, wiping a small circle through which to view her new home. The townhouse was narrow and unassuming, wedged between grander residences, like a poor relation seated at the end of a banquet table. Its brickwork needed pointing, and the iron railings showed spots of rust that would have horrified her mother. But it was hers, the only thing her late husband had not managed to gamble away or drink into oblivion, and she would learn to be grateful for it. "Not much to look at, is it, my lady?" Rosalind turned to find her maid, Nell, peering past her shoulder with the frank assessment of a woman who had long ago abandoned any pretense of proper servant behaviour. They had been together for 15 years, since Rosalind was a girl of 13, and Nell a young housemaid with opinions about everything. Time and tragedy had only strengthened the bond between them. "It has a roof and walls," Rosalind said. "That is more than many can claim. And a leak in the attic, from what the solicitor said, and a kitchen that hasn't been properly used since the old king was young." Nell shook her head, sending her grey-streaked curls trembling beneath her cap. "Your father would weep to see you brought so low." A familiar knife twisted in Rosalind's chest. "My father made his choices. I am living with the consequences of them." It was as much as she would say, even to Nell. Some secrets were too heavy to share, too sharp to examine in daylight. She had carried hers for 10 years now, and she would carry it to her grave. The coachman opened the door, and Rosalind gathered her travelling cloak around her before stepping into the grey London afternoon. The air smelled of coal smoke and horses, of rain and rot, and the peculiar staleness of a city that had grown too large for its own good. She had spent the last 3 years in Italy, where the light was golden and the air tasted of salt and oranges, and her senses rebelled against this assault of English gloom. But Italy was behind her now. Her husband was dead drowned in a canal in Venice, too drunk to save himself when he tumbled from a bridge, and her widow's jointure had proved to be nothing but debts and empty promises. She had sold everything she could, paid what creditors she must, and scraped together just enough to return to England and take possession of this sad little house. She was 28 years old, a widow with no children, no fortune, and no prospects. In the eyes of society, she was a cautionary tale. She intended to prove them wrong, though she could not yet say how. "The furniture was sold with the house," the solicitor had told her, "though I cannot vouch for its condition." He had not exaggerated. The front hall was cramped and dark, its wallpaper peeling in the corners, its single table scarred with the rings of countless glasses. The sitting room beyond held a settee that had perhaps been fashionable during her grandmother's youth, 2 chairs of uncertain stability, and a carpet so faded its original pattern could only be guessed at. Rosalind stood in the centre of this room and allowed herself one moment of despair. She had grown up in a house with 30 rooms and a staff of 40. She had been presented at court, had danced at Almack's, had worn gowns that cost more than this entire building. Now she would be lucky if she could afford to keep Nell on, let alone hire additional help. "Well," Nell said briskly, setting down the bags she carried, "no use standing about feeling sorry for ourselves. I'll find the kitchen and see what can be salvaged. You'd best write to your cousin and let her know you've arrived. Lady Ashworth will want to see you, and the sooner you're out in society again, the better." Rosalind winced. "I'm not certain society wishes to see me." "Society can go hang itself. You're a viscount's widow, respectable as they come, and your cousin is a marchioness. No one will dare cut you while you have her protection." It was true enough. Cousin Marguerite had married well, spectacularly well, and her position as Marchioness of Dennington gave her considerable power in the drawing-rooms of Mayfair. She had written to Rosalind regularly during the Italian exile, letters full of warmth and concern that Rosalind had treasured, even as she wondered if she deserved such loyalty. "I shall write to her," Rosalind agreed, "but not today. Today I want only to rest." "You've been resting for 3 weeks on that ship." "That was not rest. That was endurance." The crossing had been rough, the accommodations cramped, and Rosalind had spent most of the voyage either ill or desperately trying not to be. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose, and the face that had stared back at her from her cabin's small mirror had looked more ghost than woman. She climbed the narrow stairs to the first floor, where the bedrooms waited. There were 2, a larger chamber at the front, overlooking the street, and a smaller one at the back, overlooking a courtyard so small it barely deserved the name. Rosalind chose the smaller room without hesitation. It was quieter, and the window faced east, which meant morning light. The bed was narrow but clean, the linens having been laid in by the solicitor's clerk in anticipation of her arrival. Rosalind sat on its edge and pressed her hands to her face, feeling the bones beneath her skin more prominent than they should be. She had once been called beautiful, not pretty, never pretty, but striking, memorable, the kind of woman men watched across ballrooms. Now she was merely thin and tired and old before her time. 10 years, she thought. 10 years since she had last set foot in London. 10 years since she had stood in her father's study and heard him pronounce her fate. 10 years since she had watched, dry-eyed and silent, as a footman carried her letters down to the kitchen fire. She had never read them. Not a single one. Her father had made her promise, had gripped her hand with his failing strength and begged her to stay strong, to do her duty, to give him peace in his final days. And she had promised because she loved him, because she could not bear to see him suffer, because she was 18 and believed that fathers knew best. The letters had stopped after 2 years. She had counted every one. 47, each addressed in the same bold hand. Each returned to its sender with its seal unbroken. She had imagined them 1,000 times words of love, of anger, of pleading, of farewell. She had never known which imaginings came closest to the truth. Sebastian. She had not allowed herself to think his name in years. She had trained herself to think around him, the way one's tongue learns to avoid a broken tooth. He was a gap in her history, a story she never told, a wound that had scarred over but never healed. And now she was in London again. London, where he lived. London, where she might see him at any moment, in any ballroom or theatre or shop. London, where she would have to pretend that the sight of him did not still have the power to stop her heart. Perhaps he was married by now. Perhaps he had children, a comfortable wife, a life that held no room for the memory of a girl who had loved him and left him without explanation. That would be best. That would be what she hoped for, what she prayed for. That would be a lie, and Rosalind had grown too tired for lies. Marguerite's invitation arrived 3 days later, carried by a liveried footman whose immaculate appearance made Rosalind painfully aware of her own shabby surroundings. A small gathering, the note said. Intimate, only close friends, no one who will make you uncomfortable. Please come. I have missed you desperately. Rosalind did not want to go. She wanted to hide in this small house until she had figured out what to do with her life, until she had built walls strong enough to withstand whatever London might throw at her. But Nell was right. She could not hide forever. And Marguerite's protection was too valuable to refuse. She wore her best gown, a deep green silk that had been fashionable 3 years ago and might, with luck, pass for deliberately understated rather than simply outdated. Nell dressed her hair in a simple style that required no maid's assistance to maintain, and Rosalind examined herself in the spotted mirror with a critical eye. She looked presentable. Not beautiful, not any more, but presentable. The green brought out the amber of her eyes and warmed her too pale complexion. Her cheekbones were too sharp, but candlelight would soften them. She would do. The Dennington townhouse blazed with light, every window glowing against the evening darkness. Rosalind's hired carriage felt shabby, pulling up behind the gleaming equipages of the other guests. But she lifted her chin and refused to feel ashamed. She had done nothing wrong. She had nothing to apologize for. Marguerite met her in the entrance hall, abandoning her post by the drawing-room doors to sweep Rosalind into an embrace that smelled of French perfume and felt like coming home. "Oh, my dear," Marguerite murmured against her hair. "Oh, my dear, dear girl, let me look at you." She pulled back, holding Rosalind at arm's length, and her lovely face creased with concern. Marguerite was 45 now, silver threading through her dark hair, but she was still one of the most beautiful women Rosalind had ever known. Time had only added depth to her beauty, carving character into features that had once been merely pretty. "You're too thin," Marguerite pronounced, "and too pale. And those shadows under your eyes would frighten children. What did that beast of a husband do to you?" "Nothing I did not survive. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Rosalind managed a smile, though it felt fragile on her lips. "I am here, Marguerite. I am whole. That is more than many women in my position can claim." Marguerite's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent decades navigating society's expectations. "You are the bravest person I know. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. It is a small group tonight, as I promised only people who will be kind to you." The drawing-room was indeed intimate, holding perhaps 20 guests arranged in small conversational clusters. Rosalind recognized some faces from her debut season, now aged and altered by a decade of living. Others were strangers, Marguerite's newer friends, acquired during Rosalind's long absence. She made her way through the introductions with the autopilot grace of her upbringing, smiling and nodding and saying all the right things while her mind drifted elsewhere. This was what she had dreaded, this return to a world she had once inhabited but no longer belonged to. She felt like a ghost at her own funeral, watching others go through the motions of life while she stood apart, transparent and forgotten. And then she looked across the room, and 10 years collapsed into nothing. He stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand, his dark head bent toward a shorter gentleman who was speaking with animated gestures. He had changed, of course he had changed. A decade leaves its mark on everyone, but she would have known him anywhere. The height, the breadth of shoulder, the way he held himself as though the world were a burden he had agreed to carry. His hair was shorter than she remembered, shot through with the first hints of grey at the temples. His face had hardened, losing the last softness of youth, becoming something carved and classical and almost severe. Sebastian. As though he felt her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across 20 feet of candle-lit drawing-room, and Rosalind felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. His expression did not change. That was what struck her first, the complete absence of reaction, as though she were a stranger, as though they had never meant anything to each other at all. He looked at her the way one looks at a piece of furniture, noting its presence, assessing its function, dismissing it as unimportant. She had prepared herself for anger. She had steeled herself for hatred, for cutting remarks, for the cold shoulder of a man who had loved her and been betrayed. She had not prepared for this absolute indifference, as though she had never mattered at all. "Rosalind?" Marguerite's hand touched her elbow. "Are you quite well? You've gone pale." Rosalind forced herself to look away from those grey eyes. "I did not realize Lord Thornfield would be among your guests." Marguerite followed her gaze, and understanding dawned on her face. "Oh, my dear, I should have warned you. Sebastian and my husband have become close friends these past years. I could not exclude him without giving offence. Of course not. Rosalind's voice sounded strange to her own ears, too high and too thin. It is quite all right. It has been 10 years after all. Whatever existed between us is long since dead and buried. But Sebastian was moving now, cutting through the clusters of guests with the focused determination of a predator stalking prey. Rosalind watched him approach and felt her heart hammering against her ribs, each beat a small betrayal. Lady Blackmore. His bow was correct, his tone carefully neutral. Up close, she could see the lines that time had carved around his eyes and mouth, the faint scar above his left eyebrow that had not been there before. His eyes were the same grey shot through with blue, the colour of winter skies before a storm, but they held none of the warmth she remembered. They were cold, these eyes, cold and distant and carefully empty. "Lord Thornfield," she curtsied, grateful for the ritual that gave her something to do with her trembling body. "It has been a long time." 10 years. He said it flatly, without inflection, as though reciting a figure from a ledger. "I had heard you were abroad." "Italy. I have only recently returned." "And Lord Blackmore? Does he accompany you?" The question was polite, conventional, the sort of thing anyone might ask. But Rosalind heard the edge beneath it, the razor hidden in silk. "Lord Blackmore passed away 6 months ago." Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes too quickly for her to identify and then vanished. "My condolences." "Thank you." They stared at each other. Around them the party continued laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses and the rustle of silk. But Rosalind was aware of none of it. She existed only in this bubble of tension and history, facing a man she had loved with all her young heart, a man she had destroyed without ever explaining why. "You look well," she offered, desperate to fill the silence. "Do I?" His smile was thin and cold. "I am told I look like a man carved from stone. The newspapers have taken to calling me the Stone Earl. I find the epithet rather apt. Sebastian. Lord Thornfield, if you please." The words cut like a blade. "We are not intimates, Lady Blackmore. We are not friends. We are not even acquaintances, really merely two people who once shared a brief connection that has long since been severed." Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. "I see." "Do you? I wonder." He took a sip of his wine, watching her over the rim of his glass. "I confess I am curious about your return to London. One might have expected you to remain abroad, where the climate is so much more agreeable." The climate was not sufficient reason to stay. And what was sufficient reason to return? Not the joyful anticipation of society, I think. You were never fond of ballrooms and gossip. He remembered. Despite everything, despite the ice in his voice and the emptiness in his eyes, he remembered what she had been like 10 years ago. The knowledge was both comfort and curse. "I returned because I had nowhere else to go," Rosalind said. "My husband left me nothing but debts and a small townhouse in Curzon Street. I am, to put it plainly, without resources or prospects." She did not know why she told him the truth. Perhaps because lies seemed pointless between them, after everything. Perhaps because she wanted him to know that she had not escaped unscathed, that the choice she had made 10 years ago had cost her everything. Sebastian's expression flickered again, surprise, perhaps, or something darker. "I am sorry to hear it." "Are you?" "I am not entirely without feeling, Lady Blackmore, whatever rumours may suggest." "I never believed you were without feeling." "No?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And yet you returned my letters unopened for 2 years. One might have thought you wished to prove otherwise." There it was, the wound she had known he carried, laid bare between them. Rosalind felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing how deeply his words cut. "That is a conversation for another time," she managed, "and perhaps another place. On that, at least, we agree." Sebastian inclined his head with cold courtesy. "I wish you well in your reduced circumstances, Lady Blackmore. No doubt we shall encounter one another again. London is smaller than it seems. But I trust we can behave as civilized adults when we do." He turned and walked away without waiting for her response, his broad back rigid with the effort of restraint. Rosalind watched him go and felt something crack inside her chest, something she had thought long since broken, now revealed to have been merely dormant. She loved him still. God help her. After 10 years and a disastrous marriage and everything that had passed between them, she loved him still. It was, she thought, the cruelest joke fate had ever played on her. The next weeks passed in a blur of small humiliations and growing desperation. Rosalind examined her finances with the cold precision of a general surveying a losing battlefield, and found the situation even worse than she had feared. The townhouse was mortgaged to its chimneys. Her widow's jointure, such as it was, barely covered the interest payments. At the rate she was spending, she had perhaps 6 months before the creditors came calling. And then what? The street? She could sell the house, but that would leave her with nothing. She could appeal to Marguerite for help, but her pride rebelled against the thought. She could. There was one other option, one she had been avoiding, one that made her stomach clench with a mixture of dread and something she refused to name as hope. "You could seek employment," Nell said one evening, laying out Rosalind's meagre supper with the air of someone delivering unpleasant medicine. "There's no shame in it, my lady. Many gentlewomen have been brought low by circumstances, and they survive by their wits and their skills." "What skills do I possess that anyone would pay for?" Rosalind stared at the thin soup, the bread that was only slightly stale, the single slice of cheese that represented the extent of their extravagance. "I can embroider adequately. I can play the pianoforte without embarrassing myself. I can make polite conversation in 4 languages. None of these are marketable talents." "You could be a governess, or a companion to some elderly lady." A companion. Rosalind turned the word over in her mind. It was not as low as governess companions occupied a strange middle ground in the social hierarchy, neither servant nor equal, existing in the shadows between worlds. She had known companions when she was young, faded gentlewomen who hovered at the edges of ballrooms and pretended not to mind when they were overlooked. Could she become one of them? Could she swallow her pride and accept a position that would mark her fall from grace as clearly as a brand on her forehead? The alternative was the street, the workhouse, starvation. "I shall make inquiries," she said quietly. "Perhaps Marguerite knows of someone in need." Marguerite, as it turned out, knew of several possibilities, but one stood out above the rest, for reasons that made Rosalind's heart sink, even as her practical mind recognized its advantages. "Lady Helena Fairfax is seeking a companion," Marguerite said over tea the following afternoon. "She is recently widowed well, 2 years now, but she has not yet emerged from her grief, and she has 2 young children who need more stimulation than their nurse can provide. The position would include room and board, a generous salary, and the opportunity to live in one of the finest houses in Mayfair." "Lady Helena Fairfax," Rosalind repeated slowly. "Is she not Lord Thornfield's sister?" Marguerite had the grace to look uncomfortable. "She is, but I thought that is, given the circumstances. You thought that my desperate need for employment would outweigh my reluctance to spend every day in Sebastian's household. I thought that 10 years was long enough to let old wounds heal." Marguerite reached across the table to clasp Rosalind's hand. "My dear, I know there was something between you and Sebastian once. I know it ended badly, I do not know the details. and I have never pressed, but whatever happened, it was a lifetime ago. You are both different people now. Surely you can exist in the same house without tearing each other apart." Rosalind thought of Sebastian's cold eyes across the drawing room, of his bitter words about the letters she had returned, of the way her heart had raced at the mere sight of him, even after everything. "I do not know if we can," she admitted, "but I do not see that I have a choice." "Then you will apply?" "I will apply." The letter was sent that afternoon. The response came the following morning, not from Lady Helena, but from Lord Thornfield's secretary, a crisply worded summons to present herself at Ashworth House for an interview at precisely 2 o'clock. Rosalind dressed with care, choosing a sober grey gown that proclaimed her widowed status and her serious intentions. She had Nell arrange her hair in the simple style of a woman who needed to be practical rather than pretty. She wore no jewellery except her wedding ring, a thin band of gold that she kept more from habit than sentiment, and the small pearl earrings that had been her mother's. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was trying to become, a respectable widow seeking respectable employment. Nothing more. Ashworth House was everything her little townhouse was not. It rose 4 stories from the pavement, its Portland stone facade gleaming white in the afternoon sun, its windows sparkling, its steps swept clean of every speck of dirt. The brass knocker shaped like a lion's head shone like gold, and the door opened before Rosalind had even released it, revealing a butler whose dignity could have graced a cathedral. "Lady Blackmore," she said, handing over her card. "I am expected." "Indeed, my lady, if you will follow me." The entrance hall was marble and mahogany, a sweeping staircase rising to the upper floors, a chandelier casting rainbows across the walls. Rosalind allowed herself a moment to admire it. She had once imagined living in a house like this, had once dreamed of being its mistress, before following the butler to a closed door at the end of a long corridor. "Lord Thornfield will see you in his study, my lady." Of course he would. Not Lady Helena, who was nominally the one seeking a companion, but Sebastian himself. He would want to control this interview, to remind Rosalind of the power he held over her now. She had come to him as a supplicant, and he would make certain she knew it. She straightened her spine and walked through the door. The study was large and masculine, its walls lined with books, its furniture heavy and dark. A fire burned in the grate despite the mild weather, and the windows looked out over a garden that was just beginning to bloom with spring flowers. Sebastian sat behind a massive desk, papers spread before him, a pen in his hand. He did not rise when she entered. "Lady Blackmore." He set down the pen and steepled his fingers before him. "Please, sit." She sat in the chair he indicated, a straight-backed thing that forced her to hold herself perfectly upright. He watched her settle, his grey eyes giving nothing away. "I confess I was surprised to receive your letter," he said. "I had not thought you would lower yourself to seek employment. Needs must when the devil drives, my lord." "Indeed." He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. Her letter, she realized. "You write that you believe yourself well suited to serve as a companion to my sister. What qualifies you for such a position?" Rosalind folded her hands in her lap and forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I am educated, well-bred, and experienced in the management of a household. I speak French, Italian, and German fluently. I am skilled in needlework, music, and the art of conversation. I have lived abroad and can provide entertaining accounts of foreign lands. I am patient with children and comfortable with grief, having experienced both extensively in my own life." "An impressive list." Sebastian's tone suggested otherwise. "And yet you have no references, no previous experience in service, and forgive me for mentioning it, a certain history that might make some households reluctant to employ you." "What history would that be, my lord?" His smile was thin and cold. a broken engagement, a hasty marriage to a man of dubious reputation, 3 years spent abroad under circumstances that remain unclear, a sudden return to London upon your husband's death. Society has wondered about you, Lady Blackmore. There are rumours. There are always rumours about widows, some of them rather colourful. Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks, but refused to look away. I cannot control what people say about me, my lord. I can only assure you that I am exactly what I appear to be, a woman in reduced circumstances seeking honest employment. Nothing more scandalous than that. And yet scandal seems to follow you, does it not? As it follows anyone who dares to step outside the narrow bounds society has drawn. She heard the edge creeping into her voice and forced herself to soften it. My lord, if you have already decided against employing me, I wish you would say so plainly, rather than subjecting me to this interrogation. Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. You have grown bold in your old age, Lady Blackmore. I have grown tired, Lord Thornfield. There is a difference. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled in the grate, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed the quarter hour. Rosalind waited, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he must be able to hear it. Finally, Sebastian spoke. My sister is fragile. She lost her husband 2 years ago to a fever, and she has not yet found her way back to the living. She has 2 children, Thomas, who is 7, and Eleanor, who is 5, and while she loves them dearly, she has difficulty engaging with them as she once did. She needs someone who can be both companion to her and auxiliary mother to them. Someone patient, someone kind, someone who understands grief. I understand grief very well, my lord. Do you? He leaned forward, his eyes searching her face. What have you grieved for, Lady Blackmore? What have you lost? Everything, she wanted to say. You, my father, my youth, my dreams, every future I thought I would have. My husband, she said instead. My parents, my position in society. My faith in the goodness of the world. That is quite a list. It has been quite a decade. Sebastian held her gaze for a long moment, and Rosalind saw something shift behind his eyes, a crack in the ice, quickly sealed, but not quickly enough to hide. He was not as cold as he pretended. Somewhere beneath that stone exterior, the man she had loved still lived. The knowledge was both comfort and torture. I will not pretend that having you in my household will be comfortable, Sebastian said at last, for either of us. There is too much history between us, too many words unspoken. But Helena needs someone, and you need employment, and perhaps— He stopped, shaking his head. Perhaps God has a sense of humor after all. Does that mean you will give me the position? It means I will introduce you to my sister and let her decide. If she finds you suitable, the position is yours. He rose from his desk, and Rosalind rose with him. One condition. Yes? Whatever existed between us 10 years ago is dead and buried. We will not speak of it. We will not revisit it. We will behave as polite strangers who happen to share a roof. If you cannot agree to those terms, you should leave now. Rosalind swallowed the protest that rose to her lips. He was right. It was the only way they could survive in close proximity. And yet some part of her rebelled against the thought of pretending that what they had shared meant nothing, that the letters she had returned were just ink on paper, that her heart did not still ache every time she looked at him. I agree, she said. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing, Lady Blackmore. Yes? The letters I wrote you. His voice was very quiet now, stripped of its earlier coldness. The 47 letters you returned unopened over the course of 2 years. I kept them. Every one. They are in a drawer in this very desk. Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know that I remember. Every word I wrote to you, every plea I made, every hope I expressed, and every hope you crushed, I remember all of it. And I want you to remember too. I want you to remember every time you walk past this door, every time you see me across the breakfast table, every time you lie in your bed at night wondering how things might have been different. I want it to haunt you as it has haunted me." He opened the door before she could respond, gesturing for her to precede him into the corridor. His face had resumed its mask of cold indifference, as though he had not just flayed her heart open with his words. "Shall we go and meet my sister?" he asked pleasantly. "I believe you will find her in the drawing room." Rosalind walked past him on legs that trembled, her mind reeling. The letters were here, in this house, in this very room, feet from where she had been sitting, close enough to touch if she had only known where to look. 47 letters, each one a piece of Sebastian's heart that she had refused to accept. 10 years of wondering what they said, of imagining their contents in the dark hours of sleepless nights. And now they were within reach, and yet further away than ever, locked in a drawer by a man who hated her. She had thought coming to Ashworth House would be difficult. She had not realized it would be impossible. And yet she followed Sebastian down the corridor, toward the drawing room, and Lady Helena, and a future she could not begin to imagine. Because she had no choice. Because she was desperate. Because, God help her, some part of her still hoped that the man she had loved might somehow forgive her, even though she could never, ever tell him the truth. Lady Helena Fairfax was nothing like her brother. Where Sebastian was tall and dark and carved from winter stone, Helena was small and fair and soft as spring rain. Her hair was the colour of wheat at harvest, her eyes a gentle blue that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. She sat in the drawing-room like a wilted flower, her black morning dress draining what little colour remained in her cheeks, her hands folded in her lap with the stillness of someone who had forgotten how to move. And yet there was something in her face when she looked at Rosalind, a flicker of interest, a spark of recognition that suggested the woman she had been before grief had hollowed her out. "Lady Blackmore," Helena said, her voice soft and slightly uncertain. "My brother tells me you are seeking a position as my companion." "I am, Lady Helena." Rosalind curtsied, acutely aware of Sebastian standing by the window, watching them both with those unreadable grey eyes. "Though I should tell you honestly that I have never held such a position before. I was raised as a gentleman's daughter and married as a viscount's wife. I have no experience in service. And yet, here you are." Helena's lips curved in something that was almost a smile. "Circumstances have a way of humbling us, do they not?" "They do indeed. Please sit." Helena gestured to the chair beside her, and Rosalind sank into it gratefully. Her legs were still trembling from her confrontation with Sebastian in the study, and she did not trust them to hold her upright much longer. "Tell me about yourself. Not your qualifications, Sebastian has already listed those, but yourself. Who are you, Lady Blackmore? What brings you joy? What brings you sorrow? What do you dream of in the quiet hours of the night?" The questions were unexpected, almost startlingly intimate. Rosalind glanced at Sebastian, but his expression gave nothing away. She turned back to Helena and considered her answer carefully. "I find joy in small things," she said at last. "A well-turned phrase in a book, the first crocus of spring, the sound of children laughing. I spent 3 years in Italy, and I still dream of the light there, the way it turned everything golden, as though the whole world were dipped in honey." "And sorrow?" Rosalind's throat tightened. "I have known a great deal of sorrow, Lady Helena. I lost my father when I was 18, my mother when I was 22, my husband 6 months ago. I have learned that grief is not something you move past, it is something you carry with you, a weight that becomes part of who you are. Helena's eyes glistened. Yes, that is exactly right. Everyone tells me I should be recovered by now. 2 years, they say, as though grief has an expiration date. But I wake every morning and reach for Henry, and every morning I remember that he is gone, and the wound opens fresh. I am sorry for your loss, as I am for yours. Helena leaned forward, studying Rosalind's face with an intensity that belied her fragile appearance. Were you happy with your husband, Lady Blackmore? Did you love him? The question struck like a blow. Rosalind felt Sebastian's gaze sharpen, felt the weight of his attention pressing down on her. She could lie. It would be the polite thing to do, the expected thing, but something in Helena's earnest face demanded honesty. No, she said quietly. I did not love him. I married him for reasons that had nothing to do with love, and I paid for that choice every day of my marriage. Then you understand what it is to be trapped, Helena said. What it is to smile when you want to scream, to perform contentment when every moment is agony. I understand that very well. Helena sat back, and something in her posture shifted, a relaxation, a release of tension Rosalind had not even noticed she was holding. I believe you do. I believe you are exactly what I need, Lady Blackmore. Someone who understands that grief is not weakness, that sorrow is not shame, that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply survive. Does that mean? It means I would like you to stay. Helena glanced at her brother. Sebastian? Do you have any objections? Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice was smooth when he spoke. None whatsoever. If you find Lady Blackmore suitable, I shall make the necessary arrangements. Then it is settled. Helena rose, and Rosalind rose with her. Can you begin tomorrow? I know it is sudden, but I find I am impatient now that I have made my decision. It has been so long since I have made any decision at all. Tomorrow would be perfect, Rosalind said, her heart hammering with a mixture of relief and dread. She had secured the position. She would have a roof over her head, food in her belly, a salary that would allow her to pay her debts. She would also be living under the same roof as Sebastian, seeing him every day, carrying the weight of his hatred, while the letters she had never read sat locked in his desk. It was, she thought, a very particular kind of purgatory. The first week was an exercise in careful navigation. Rosalind learned the rhythms of Ashworth House, the hours when Sebastian was in his study and should not be disturbed, the times when Helena was most likely to be alert and wanting company, the moments when the children could be found in the nursery, hungry for attention their mother could not give. Thomas and Eleanor were beautiful children, with their mother's fair colouring and their uncle's grey eyes. Thomas was serious for his age, already carrying the weight of being the man of his small family, watching over his sister with a protectiveness that made Rosalind's heart ache. Eleanor was softer, sweeter, prone to tears that came suddenly and vanished just as quickly, leaving her bewildered by her own emotions. They were, Rosalind realized, children shaped by grief. They had lost their father at ages when loss was incomprehensible, when the world was supposed to be safe and unchanging. They had watched their mother retreat into shadows, had learned to tiptoe around her sorrow, had become small and quiet in an effort not to disturb her fragile peace. It was not healthy, and Rosalind set about changing it with a determination that surprised even herself. "Shall we have an adventure?" she asked on her third morning, finding the children at breakfast with their nurse, their faces blank with the boredom of routine. Thomas looked up, a spark of interest in his grey eyes. "What kind of adventure?" "The best kind. The kind where we explore places we have never been before." Rosalind smiled conspiratorially. "I am told there is an attic in this house that has not been opened in years. An attic full of old trunks and forgotten treasures, and possibly, just possibly, a ghost or two. Eleanor's eyes went wide. A ghost? Perhaps. We shall have to investigate to find out. The children exchanged glances, and Rosalind saw something pass between them, a silent communication, a weighing of risks and rewards. Then Thomas set down his spoon and stood. "I want to see the attic," he announced. "Me too," Eleanor chimed in, scrambling from her chair. The nurse, a solid woman named Mrs. Patterson, who clearly disapproved of adventures, opened her mouth to object, but Rosalind cut her off with a smile. "We shall be back by luncheon," she said, "and I promise to return them in one piece." The attic was everything Rosalind had hoped for. Dusty and dim, its sloped ceilings creating nooks and corners that begged to be explored. It held the accumulated treasures of generations of Ashworths. There were old trunks filled with clothing from decades past, their fabrics moth-eaten but still beautiful. There were stacks of books too old or too damaged for the library below. There were paintings wrapped in cloth, their subjects revealed one by one as Rosalind and the children unwrapped them. Stern ancestors, placid landscapes, a rather alarming portrait of a woman in Elizabethan dress, who Thomas immediately christened the Scary Lady. But the greatest treasure was a rocking horse, tucked in the corner beneath a sheet. Its paint was chipped, and its mane was missing half its hair. But when Thomas climbed aboard and began to rock, his face transformed. For the first time since Rosalind had met him, he looked like a child. "This was Father's," Eleanor said softly, running her small hand along the horse's flank. "I remember. He told us about it once." "Then it belongs to you now," Rosalind said. "Both of you. Shall we bring it down to the nursery?" They carried it down together, the children gripping the horse's legs, while Rosalind guided it around corners and downstairs. By the time they reached the nursery, all three of them were dusty and laughing, and Mrs. Patterson's disapproval had thawed into something that might, with patience, become approval. "Again tomorrow?" Thomas asked, as Rosalind prepared to leave them for their lessons. "Again tomorrow," she promised, "and the day after that. There are many adventures still to be had, and I intend for us to have all of them." She did not see Sebastian watching from the doorway, did not see the way his expression shifted as he observed her with his niece and nephew, the ice in his eyes melting for just a moment into something that looked almost like longing. By the time she turned, he was gone, and she told herself she had imagined the shadow in the corner of her vision. Helena's grief was a more delicate project. Unlike the children, who were hungry for stimulation and starved for attention, Helena had wrapped herself in sorrow like a cocoon, afraid that emerging would mean betraying the husband she had loved so desperately. Rosalind began gently, with cups of tea and quiet conversation, asking Helena about Henry, not avoiding the subject as everyone else seemed to do, but inviting her to speak of him, to share memories and stories, to keep him alive through words. "He was not handsome," Helena said one afternoon, her voice soft with remembrance. "Not in the way Sebastian is handsome, all sharp edges and intensity. Henry was comfortable, warm. He had the kindest eyes I have ever seen, and when he laughed you could not help but laugh with him." "How did you meet?" "At a ball, of all places. I was 18 and terrified it was my first season, and I was convinced I would make a fool of myself. Henry found me hiding behind a potted fern and asked if I was all right. I told him I was contemplating whether the fern would provide adequate cover if I simply refused to emerge. He laughed and said he had been considering the same thing." "It sounds like fate." It was. Helena's eyes grew distant. Sebastian did not approve at first. Henry was a baron's son, respectable but not titled, and Sebastian thought I could do better. But I loved Henry, and Henry loved me. And eventually Sebastian came to see what I saw, that titles and fortunes mean nothing compared to a heart that beats in rhythm with your own. Rosalind felt a familiar ache in her chest. She had known that kind of love once, briefly, before it had been ripped away. "You were fortunate." "I was." Helena looked at her with sudden intensity. "Were you never in love, Rosalind? Before your husband, I mean. Was there never anyone who made your heart race?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp-edged and dangerous. Rosalind thought of Sebastian, of the young man he had been 10 years ago, of the way his smile had lit up a room and his touch had set her skin on fire. She thought of the letters she had never read, locked in his desk mere floors below where they sat. "There was someone," she said carefully, "a long time ago. It did not end well." "What happened?" "Circumstances intervened. My father—" She stopped, the familiar weight of secrecy pressing down on her tongue. "My father had other plans for me." Helena's face softened with understanding. "Ah, yes, I know how that goes. Parents often think they know best, when in truth they know nothing at all about the heart's requirements." She paused. "Does Sebastian know? About this man from your past?" Rosalind's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "Why do you ask about Sebastian?" "Because my brother watches you when he thinks no one is looking. Because he grows stiff and strange whenever your name is mentioned. Because I have known him all my life, and I have never seen him react to anyone the way he reacts to you." Helena leaned forward. "Is he the one, Rosalind? The man you loved before?" For a long moment, Rosalind could not speak. The truth sat on her tongue like a live coal, burning to be released, but the habit of secrecy was too deeply ingrained. Sebastian had made her promise not to speak of their past. If she broke that promise now, she might lose the position she so desperately needed. "That is a complicated question," she said at last, "with a complicated answer." "Most of the important questions are." Helena reached over and took her hand, her touch gentle and warm. "You do not have to tell me, but I want you to know that whatever happened between you and my brother, whatever wounds you both carry, I believe they can be healed. Sebastian was not always the Stone Earl. Once he was warm and passionate and full of dreams. I believe that man still exists somewhere beneath the ice. And I believe you might be the one to reach him." Rosalind shook her head. "He hates me, Helena. Hate and love are closer than you think. Both require passion. Both require care. Indifference is the true opposite of love, and whatever Sebastian feels for you, it is not indifference." The words stayed with Rosalind for the rest of the day, turning over in her mind like stones in a tumbler, their edges slowly smoothing. Was Helena right? Was there something beneath Sebastian's coldness, other than contempt? And if there was, if some part of him still cared, what then? The truth of why she had returned his letters was a secret she could never share, a burden she would carry to her grave. Some wounds could not be healed, some distances could not be bridged. Sometimes all you could do was survive. 3 weeks into her employment, Rosalind found herself alone in the library on a rainy afternoon. Helena was resting, the children were with their nurse, and the house had settled into the quiet rhythm of an English country day, transported to the heart of London. She had chosen a book from the shelves, a volume of poetry that looked well worn, its spine cracked from frequent reading, and curled up in a chair by the window to lose herself in verse. She did not hear the door open, did not realize she was no longer alone until a shadow fell across the page. "That is mine." Rosalind looked up, startled, to find Sebastian standing over her. His cravat was loosened, his hair slightly dishevelled, and there was something in his expression she had never seen before, a crack in the stone, a glimpse of the man beneath. "I beg your pardon?" "The book." He gestured to the volume in her hands. "It belonged to me. I did not realize it was still here." Rosalind looked down at the poetry, at the marginalia scrawled in a familiar hand, and felt her heart clench. "You wrote in the margins." "I was young. I thought my opinions mattered." He held out his hand. "May I?" She passed him the book, and he sank into the chair across from her, opening it to a random page. His eyes scanned the verses, and something in his face softened, a memory surfacing, perhaps, or a grief too old to name. "I have not read poetry in years," he said quietly. "I used to devour it. Wordsworth, Byron, Keats, anyone who could capture feeling in words. I thought if I read enough of it, I might understand how to express what was inside me." "And did you?" "For a time." He looked up, his grey eyes meeting hers. "I wrote poetry myself once. Terrible stuff, mostly overwrought and melodramatic, the product of a young man who thought he knew everything about love." He laughed, a bitter sound. "I burned most of it, but some I saved." "Why did you stop?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. "I learned that words are useless, that you can pour your heart onto a page and send it across the world, and the person for whom it is intended might never even read it. That poetry changes nothing. That love changes nothing." He closed the book with a snap. "I became a man of action instead. Accounts and ledgers. Things that mean what they say and say what they mean." Rosalind felt the familiar knife twist in her chest. He was talking about the letters, the 47 letters she had returned without opening. Each one a piece of his heart she had rejected without ever knowing what it contained. "Sebastian, Lord Thornfield." His voice had turned to ice again, the momentary thaw vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "We agreed, Lady Blackmore. The past is dead. Let us not resurrect it." He rose, the book still in his hand, and strode toward the door. But at the threshold, he paused. "You are good with the children," he said without turning. "Helena tells me Thomas laughed yesterday for the first time in months. Eleanor has begun to chatter again instead of whispering. You are helping them. I am trying. You are succeeding." He turned his head, just enough for her to see his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "I did not expect that. I did not expect any of this." "What did you expect?" For a long moment, he did not answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I expected to hate you. I expected every moment of your presence in my house to be a torment. I expected to count the days until I could be rid of you." He paused. "Instead, I find myself confused." "Confused how?" "That is what I am trying to determine." He stepped through the doorway, then turned back one last time. "The book is yours, if you want it. I find I cannot read poetry anymore without remembering things I would rather forget." He was gone before she could respond, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Rosalind sat in the grey afternoon light, the book of poetry in her lap, and felt something stir in her chest that she had thought long since dead. Hope. Treacherous, terrible hope. The fever came on suddenly. One moment Thomas was sitting at breakfast, eating his porridge and chattering about the adventure he and Rosalind had planned for that afternoon. The next he was pale and shaking, his small hand hot as a coal when Rosalind pressed her palm to his forehead. "Fetch the doctor," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Quickly." The next hours were a blur of cold compresses and worried faces and whispered consultations in the corridor. The doctor came and went, pronouncing it a fever of uncertain origin, prescribing rest and fluids and patience. Helena, hearing the news, retreated to her room and locked the door, unable to face the terror of watching another person she loved slip away. It was Sebastian who stayed. Sebastian, who sat by Thomas's bedside hour after hour, his face carved from granite, his grey eyes never leaving the small figure beneath the blankets. And Rosalind, who had no claim on this family except employment, stayed too because Thomas had asked for her, had gripped her hand and begged her not to leave, and she would have cut off her own arm before she broke a promise to that child. Night fell. The house grew quiet. Eleanor was asleep in her nursery, watched over by Mrs. Patterson, who had refused to leave despite being ordered to bed. Sebastian and Rosalind sat on opposite sides of Thomas's bed, the child's laboured breathing the only sound in the darkness. Henry died of a fever. Sebastian's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Helena was there when it happened. She held his hand and watched the life drain out of him, and there was nothing anyone could do. She has never recovered. Thomas will recover, Rosalind said firmly. He is young and strong, and the fever is not as high as it was. The doctor said the same things about Henry. Sebastian pressed his hands to his face, his shoulders shaking. I cannot lose him too. I cannot watch Helena lose him. It would destroy her. It would destroy us all. Without thinking, Rosalind reached across the bed and touched his arm. He flinched, but did not pull away, and after a moment his hand came up to cover hers, his fingers cold and trembling. You will not lose him, she said softly. I promise you, Sebastian. I will stay here all night if I must, all week, all month. I will not let this child die. He looked at her then, and in the dim light of the sick room, she saw something she had never seen before. The stone earl crumbling, the ice melting, the wounded heart beneath finally visible. He looked at her the way he had looked at her 10 years ago, as though she were the sun, and he a man who had been living in darkness. Rose, he breathed. Her old name, the name only he had ever called her. Rose, I am here. Why? The word was broken, ragged. Why did you do it? Why did you send back my letters? I wrote to you for 2 years, and you never once answered. I begged you to explain, to tell me what I had done wrong, to give me some reason I could understand, and you gave me nothing but silence. Rosalind felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. I could not read them, Sebastian. I wanted to God, how I wanted to, but I was forbidden. My father, your father, his voice turned bitter. Your father who gambled away your future, your father who sold you to a man who made your life a misery. That is the man whose wishes you honored over mine. He was dying. The words came out in a rush, a dam finally breaking after 10 years of silence. He was dying, Sebastian, and he begged me to obey him in this one thing. He made me promise on his deathbed that I would not read your letters, that I would not weaken, that I would do my duty and marry Blackmore as he had arranged. And I was 18 and terrified, and I loved my father despite everything he had done. I could not deny a dying man his final wish. Sebastian stared at her, his face pale in the candlelight. He knew. He knew I was writing to you, and he made you return my letters unopened. He thought it would be kinder. He thought if you never received a response, you would eventually give up and move on. He did not understand. Her voice broke. He did not understand that some loves are not so easily forgotten. Why did you not tell me? Sebastian's hand tightened on hers, almost painful. After he died, after you were married, why did you not write to me then? Why did you not explain? Because it was too late. Rosalind pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself as though she could hold her broken pieces together. You had stopped writing. I thought you had moved on, found someone else, built a life that had no room for me. And I was married to a man who watched my every move, who read my correspondence, who would have made my life even more hellish than it already was if he had discovered I was pining for another man. I could not write to you. I could barely survive. Thomas stirred in his bed, murmuring something unintelligible, and they both froze. Rosalind leaned forward, pressing her hand to his forehead, and felt her heart leap with relief. "The fever is breaking," she said. "He is cooler than he was." Sebastian slumped in his chair, all the tension draining from his body. "Thank God." They sat in silence as the night deepened around them, watching Thomas's breathing grow easier, watching the colour slowly return to his pale cheeks. When dawn began to lighten the windows, Sebastian finally spoke again. "I have spent 10 years hating you," he said quietly. 10 years convincing myself that you were heartless, cruel, unworthy of the love I had wasted on you. It was easier that way. Easier than believing you might have had reasons I could not understand. And now? Now I do not know what to believe." He looked at her, his grey eyes haunted. "You say your father made you promise. You say you could not write to me after. But those letters, the letters I sent you, you still have not read them. You do not know what I said." "No." "Would you read them now, if I gave them to you?" Rosalind's heart hammered in her chest. "Would you want me to?" "I do not know." He rose, moving to the window, his back to her. The early morning light turned his profile to gold and shadow. "Part of me wants to burn them, to destroy every trace of what I felt for you, to become the stone everyone believes me to be. But another part—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Another part wants you to know, wants you to understand what you threw away, what we might have had, what I have spent a decade trying to forget. Sebastian, I am not asking you to love me again." His voice was flat, controlled. "I am not asking for anything. I am simply telling you that the letters exist, and that if you want to read them, they are there for you. In the third drawer of my desk, locked with a key I carry in my pocket. I have carried that key for 10 years, waiting for—" He laughed bitterly. "I do not know what I was waiting for. Perhaps for you to come back. Perhaps for the courage to destroy them. Perhaps for this moment, standing in my nephew's sick room at dawn, confessing things I have never said aloud." Thomas stirred again, his eyes fluttering open. "Aunt Rosalind?" She leaned forward, taking his small hand in hers. "I am here, darling. I am right here. I had strange dreams." His voice was weak but clear. "I dreamed Father came to see me. He said I was not to worry. He said Uncle Sebastian would take care of us." Sebastian moved from the window to the bedside, dropping to his knees beside his nephew. "I will," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you, Thomas. I will take care of you and your sister and your mother. I will never let anything happen to you." Thomas smiled, a small, sleepy smile, and closed his eyes. Within moments, he was asleep again. True sleep this time, not the restless unconsciousness of fever. Rosalind and Sebastian looked at each other across the sleeping child, and something passed between them that had no name. An understanding, perhaps, an acknowledgement of all that had been lost and all that might yet be found. "You should rest," Sebastian said quietly. "You have been awake all night. So have you. I am used to sleepless nights." He rose, moving toward the door. "The doctor will come again this morning. Stay with Thomas until then. I will have breakfast sent up." "Sebastian." He paused at the door, not turning. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me, for beginning to understand." He stood motionless for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so soft she could barely hear it. "I am not certain I understand anything, but I am tired of fighting. I am tired of being stone. And when I look at you with my nephew, with my sister, with my niece—" He shook his head. "You have brought something into this house that I thought was gone forever. I do not know what to call it. Perhaps I will never know." He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading into the morning quiet. Rosalind sat by Thomas's bedside, her hand still holding the child's, her heart full of something that felt terrifyingly like hope. The letters were waiting, locked in Sebastian's desk. All she had to do was ask. But not yet. Not until she was sure she was ready to face what they contained. Thomas recovered quickly, as children do. Within a week, he was out of bed and demanding adventures again, and Rosalind was more than happy to provide them. The attic expedition was repeated, new treasures discovered, stories invented about the scary lady in the Elizabethan portrait. Eleanor joined in now, her shyness fading as she learned to trust this woman who had become, in some ways, more mother to her than her own grieving mother. Helena, too, was changing. She emerged from her room the day after Thomas's fever broke, pale and shaken, but present. She asked Rosalind to help her sort through Henry's belongings, a task she had been avoiding for 2 years, and together they spent long afternoons unpacking memories, weeping and laughing and slowly, carefully, learning to let go. "He would have liked you," Helena said one afternoon, holding up a waistcoat that had been Henry's favourite. "You are exactly the sort of sensible, no-nonsense woman he admired. He always said I was too dreamy, too prone to letting my emotions carry me away. You would have balanced us nicely. I wish I had known him. I wish you had too." Helena folded the waistcoat carefully and set it aside. "Rosalind, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you in love with my brother?" The question struck like lightning, sudden and illuminating. Rosalind opened her mouth to deny it, to protest that she could not be in love with a man who had spent 10 years hating her, who had made her return his letters, who still called her Lady Blackmore in front of the servants, but the denial would not come. "I was once," she said instead, "a long time ago." "And now?" Rosalind looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I do not know. I have spent so many years trying to forget him, trying to convince myself that what we had was a youthful fancy, a passing infatuation. But being here, in this house, seeing who he has become—" She shook her head. "I see glimpses of the man he used to be, the man who wrote poetry and laughed freely and looked at me as though I were the most precious thing in the world. And I find myself wondering if that man is truly gone, or if he is simply buried beneath the stone." "He is buried," Helena said firmly, "but not gone, never gone. Sebastian has spent 10 years building walls around his heart, but walls can be torn down." She reached over and took Rosalind's hand. "You are tearing them down, whether you realize it or not. Every time you make Thomas laugh, every time you help me face my grief, every time you challenge Sebastian instead of cowering before his coldness, you are chipping away at the stone. And he sees it. He feels it. He is terrified of it." "Why terrified?" "Because if the walls come down, he will have to feel again. And feeling is what he has been running from for a decade." Helena squeezed her hand. "Be patient with him. Be brave. And for God's sake, read those letters. He has been waiting 10 years for you to know what they say." That night, Rosalind lay in her narrow bed in the small room she had been given, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Helena's words. The letters. Always it came back to the letters. 47 pieces of paper that held the key to everything Sebastian's heart, her own redemption, the truth of what had been lost and what might yet be found. She had been afraid to ask, afraid of what she would find, afraid that reading Sebastian's words would break her open in ways she could never repair. But she had lived in fear for 10 years, and she was tired of it. Tired of secrets and silence and the weight of things unsaid. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would ask Sebastian for the letters. Tomorrow she would finally know. She found him in his study that evening, working by lamplight. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the room. And Sebastian looked tired, more tired than she had ever seen him, as though the sleepless night at Thomas's bedside had finally caught up with him. Lady Blackmore. He did not look up from his papers. Is something wrong? No. The children are well. Helena is resting. Then why are you here? Rosalind stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Sebastian's head came up at the soft click of the latch, his grey eyes suddenly alert. I came to ask you something, she said. Ask, then. She moved closer until she stood before his desk, looking down at the drawer, the third drawer, he had said, locked with a key he carried in his pocket. The letters. You said I could read them if I wanted to. Sebastian's face went very still. I did. I want to. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled in the grate. The clock ticked on the mantel. Rosalind watched Sebastian's expression shift surprise, then fear, then something that looked almost like hope. Now? He asked. Now. He rose slowly, reaching into his waistcoat pocket and withdrawing a small brass key. His hand trembled slightly as he fitted it into the lock, turning it with a click that seemed to echo in the quiet room. The drawer slid open, revealing a stack of papers bound with a faded ribbon. Rosalind's breath caught as she recognized the handwriting, her own name, written over and over in Sebastian's bold script. Lady Rosalind Ashworth. The name she would have taken if things had been different. The name she had never had the chance to claim. Sebastian lifted the letters from the drawer and held them out to her. 47, he said quietly. I numbered them. One for each time I tried to reach you. Rosalind took the bundle, feeling its weight in her hands, the weight of 10 years, of love and loss and longing. Will you stay while I read them? His eyes widened. You want me to stay? I do not think I can face them alone. They moved to the chairs by the fire, settling into them like two survivors of a shipwreck, exhausted and uncertain, but unwilling to let go of each other. Rosalind untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and lifted the first letter from the pile. The seal was still unbroken, her own seal, pressed into the wax by the footman who had returned it on her father's orders. She cracked it now, unfolding the paper, and Sebastian's words spilled across the page like water from a broken dam. My dearest Rose, it began, I do not understand why you have refused to see me, but I trust you have your reasons. Please know that whatever has happened, whatever I have done to offend you, I love you still and always. The tears came before she had finished the first paragraph. They continued as she read the second letter, and the third, and the fourth letters that spoke of love so pure and fierce it burned, of hope that refused to die, of a young man who could not believe the woman he adored had abandoned him without explanation. Sebastian watched in silence as she read, his face unreadable in the firelight. When she reached the halfway point, letter 23, written 6 months after their engagement had been broken, she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry, she whispered. Sebastian, I am so sorry. I did not know. I never imagined. Keep reading. His voice was rough. You need to see all of it. She kept reading. The letters grew darker as they progressed. Hope giving way to desperation, desperation to grief, grief to a numb acceptance that was worse than any anger. By letter 40, Sebastian was barely writing at all, a few lines, a fragment of poetry, a single question that tore Rosalind's heart in two. Why? The final letter was dated exactly 2 years after the first. It was brief, only a few sentences, and Rosalind could barely see the words through her tears. "I will not write again," Sebastian had written. "You have made your feelings clear. I wish you happiness with your husband, whoever he is. I wish you joy and peace and everything I would have given you myself if you had let me. Goodbye, Rose. I pray that someday, somehow, you will know how much I loved you." Rosalind looked up from the letter. Her vision blurred, her heart shattered. Sebastian was watching her, his face as pale as death, his grey eyes bright with unshed tears. "Now you know," he said hoarsely. "Now you understand what I—" He could not finish the sentence. Neither could she. They sat in silence as the fire burned low, the letters scattered between them like fallen leaves, 10 years of silence finally, irrevocably broken. And in that silence, something new began to grow fragile as a seedling, tender as a wound, but alive. Still alive, after everything. The fire had burned to embers by the time Rosalind set down the final letter. Her hands trembled, the paper shaking like a leaf in autumn wind, and her face was wet with tears she had stopped trying to hide hours ago. The clock on the mantel had chimed midnight, then 1, then 2, and still she had read, devouring each word as though her life depended on it. Perhaps it did. Sebastian had not moved from his chair across from her. He sat in shadow now, the dying firelight catching only fragments of his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the glitter of his eyes, the tension in his hands where they gripped the armrests. He had watched her read every letter, had witnessed every sob and gasp and whispered apology, and he had said nothing. Nothing at all. The silence between them was vast as an ocean, deep as a grave. "Sebastian," her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "I did not know. All these years I imagined what you might have written, but I could not have what?" His voice was rough, scraped raw by hours of silence and the weight of a decade's worth of buried feeling. "Could not have imagined that I loved you? Could not have believed that your silence was killing me? Could not have guessed that I wrote those letters with my heart's blood, only to have them thrown back in my face unopened? I was forbidden." The words tasted like ash on her tongue, the excuse she had clung to for 10 years suddenly feeling thin and inadequate. "My father made me promise. Your father is dead." Sebastian rose from his chair, his movement sharp and sudden. He paced to the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "He has been dead for nearly a decade. You could have told me the truth at any point. You could have written to me after you were widowed. You could have explained when you came to London, when you applied for this position, when we stood in this very room and I told you those letters were in my desk. I was afraid." "Of what?" He spun to face her, and in the dim light his expression was terrible grief and anger and something that looked almost like hope, all tangled together in a knot that could never be undone. "What could you possibly have been afraid of that was worse than what we have both endured?" Rosalind rose to her feet, the letters scattering from her lap to the floor. She did not bend to retrieve them. She could not look away from Sebastian's face, from the raw emotion that had finally broken through his carefully constructed walls. "I was afraid you would not forgive me," she said. "I was afraid that even if you understood why I did what I did, you would still hate me for doing it. I was afraid that the love you wrote about in those letters, that beautiful, terrible, all-consuming love, was dead, and that knowing what I had thrown away would destroy me. And now—" He took a step toward her, then another. "Now that you have read them? Now that you know? Now I know that I was a coward." The tears were flowing freely again, but Rosalind made no move to wipe them away. "Now I know that I should have trusted you, should have defied my father, should have found some way to tell you the truth, even if it meant risking everything. Now I know that I have wasted 10 years of both our lives, and I do not know how to ask for your forgiveness, because I am not certain I deserve it." Sebastian stood before her now, close enough to touch, his grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You do not deserve it," he said quietly. "You broke my heart, Rose. You shattered me into pieces so small I thought I would never be whole again. I became the Stone Earl because it was the only way I knew to survive, to freeze everything inside me so I would never have to feel that kind of pain again." "I know." Her voice was barely audible. "I know what I did to you. I have hated myself for it every day for 10 years. "Good." The word was harsh, but his hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle as a whisper. "You should hate yourself. You should suffer. You should lie awake at night wondering what might have been, as I have done every night since you returned my first letter." "I have." She leaned into his touch, unable to help herself. "I have suffered, Sebastian. My marriage was a prison. My husband was a monster. Every day I lived with him, I thought of you, of the life we might have had, of the love I had thrown away. I told myself it was my punishment, my penance for the choice I made. And perhaps it was. It was not enough." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, wiping away tears. 10 years of suffering is not enough to repay what you cost me. A lifetime would not be enough. Then what do you want from me?" The question came out raw, desperate. "Tell me what to do, Sebastian. Tell me how to make this right. I will do anything." "Anything?" His eyes darkened, and something shifted in his expression, the anger giving way to something older, deeper, more dangerous. "Would you give me another decade? Would you give me 20 years, 30, a lifetime of trying to repair what was broken?" "Yes." The word left her lips without hesitation. "Yes, I would give you everything. Every year I have left, every breath in my body, every beat of my heart, if you would have them." For a long moment, Sebastian was silent. His hand still cupped her face, his grey eyes still searched hers, and Rosalind felt the weight of 10 years pressing down on them both, the weight of letters unread, of words unspoken, of love denied and hope destroyed. Then, slowly, terribly, Sebastian smiled. It was not the cold smile she had seen in the drawing room at Marguerite's party, the bitter twist of lips that held no warmth. This was something else entirely, a breaking open, a crumbling of walls, a light emerging from behind clouds that had covered the sun for a decade. "Rose," he breathed, "my Rose." He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not a tentative exploration. It was a claiming, a reclaiming. 10 years of hunger and longing and fury poured into a single desperate press of lips. Rosalind gasped against his mouth, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and then she was kissing him back with equal fervour, equal need, equal fire. They had kissed before, 10 years ago, in the moonlit garden of her father's estate. Those kisses had been sweet and innocent, the first tender explorations of young love. This was something else entirely. This was a conflagration, a wildfire that threatened to consume them both. When they finally broke apart, gasping for breath, Rosalind found herself pressed against Sebastian's chest, his arms wrapped around her like iron bands, his heart pounding against her cheek. "I have dreamed of this," he murmured into her hair. "Every night for 10 years I have dreamed of holding you again. And every morning I woke to emptiness and told myself I was a fool. You were not a fool." She tilted her head back to look at him, her hands framing his face. "You were the best man I have ever known, the only man I have ever loved. Rose, let me say this." She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. I need you to know. I need you to understand that whatever else happened, whatever choices I made or did not make, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. The love I felt for you at 18 has grown and deepened and changed, but it has never wavered. It is the one constant in my life, the one thing I could never escape, no matter how hard I tried. Sebastian caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I tried to hate you. God knows I tried. I told myself every terrible thing I could imagine, that you were shallow, fickle, heartless, that you had never loved me at all, that our engagement was just a game to you. But I could never make myself believe it. Even when I was at my coldest, even when I had convinced the world I was made of stone, some part of me knew the truth. What truth? That I would love you until I died. That nothing you could do would ever change that. That I was yours, completely and irrevocably, from the moment I first saw you, and that I would be yours until my last breath. Rosalind felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks, but these were different tears of joy, of relief, of a hope she had thought forever lost. Sebastian, marry me. The words hung in the air between them, simple and earth-shattering. Rosalind stared at him, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain he must be able to hear it. What? Marry me. He took her hands in his grey eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. I know I should court you properly, should give you time to adjust, should follow all the ridiculous rules society has created for this sort of thing. But I have waited 10 years, Rose. I have wasted 10 years. I will not waste another moment. Sebastian, we barely know each other anymore. We have both changed. Then let me learn who you have become. Let me spend the rest of my life discovering every new facet of the woman you are now. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing each finger in turn. I loved the girl you were at 18. I love the woman you have become at 28, and I will love whoever you are at 38, and 48, and 88, if God grants us so many years. You cannot know that. I know that I have lived without you for 10 years, and it was barely living at all. I know that when you walked back into my life, something inside me that had been frozen began to thaw. I know that watching you with Thomas and Eleanor, with Helena, has shown me a depth of compassion and strength I did not know existed. I know that you are extraordinary, Rose, and that I was a fool to ever let you go. You did not let me go. I was taken from you. Then let me take you back. His voice was fierce now, his grip on her hands almost painful. Let me fight for you the way I should have fought 10 years ago. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved, openly, honestly, without secrets or shadows. Marry me, Rose. Be my wife, my partner, my countess. Help me bring warmth back into this house. Help me raise Helena's children. Help me become the man I was always meant to be. Rosalind looked into his eyes, those grey eyes that had haunted her dreams for a decade, and saw everything she had ever wanted. Love, yes, but also understanding. Passion, but also patience. A future that stretched out before them, uncertain but bright, terrifying but beautiful. Yes, she whispered. Sebastian's face transformed. The stone earl vanished entirely, replaced by a man so radiant with joy he barely seemed real. He caught her up in his arms, spinning her around, laughing with an abandon she had not heard from him since they were young. Yes, he repeated, setting her down and kissing her again, softer this time, reverent. You said yes. I said yes. She was laughing too, giddy and breathless. Though I warn you, Sebastian, I am not the biddable girl I was at 18. I have opinions now. I will argue with you. I am counting on it. He grinned at her, and the sight of it, that real, unreserved smile, made her heart ache with happiness. I have spent 10 years surrounded by people who are afraid to disagree with me. A wife who fights back sounds like paradise. Then paradise you shall have. She reached up to touch his face, still marveling at the fact that she was allowed to do so. Sebastian, there is one more thing I must tell you. One more truth that has been weighing on me. His expression sobered. Tell me. Whatever it is, tell me. I am done with secrets. My father. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. He did not only forbid me from reading your letters, he told me why. He said you would never marry me if you knew the truth about his debts, about the scandal that was about to break. He said your family would never accept me, that your mother would prevent the match, that I would be ruining your life if I allowed you to tie yourself to me. Sebastian's jaw tightened. My mother never even knew about you. I told no one except Helena, who supported me completely. I would have married you in a heartbeat, scandal be damned. I know that now. But I was 18, Sebastian. I was frightened and alone, and my father was dying before my eyes. He made me believe that returning your letters was a kindness, that I was saving you from a ruinous match. By the time I realized he was wrong, it was too late. It is not too late now. Sebastian pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Nothing is too late, Rose. We have found our way back to each other against all odds. That is what matters. Can you truly forgive me? I already have. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. I forgave you the moment you walked into my study and asked to read those letters. I forgave you when I watched you fight for Thomas's life. I forgave you when I saw you helping Helena learn to live again. He pulled back to look into her eyes. You have been earning my forgiveness every day without even knowing it. All that was left was for me to speak the words. Rosalind buried her face in his chest, overcome with emotion. For 10 years she had carried the weight of her choice, the guilt of her father's manipulation, the grief of love lost. And now, in the space of a single night, all of it had transformed into something new, not erased, never forgotten, but transmuted into something beautiful. I love you, she whispered into the fabric of his waistcoat. I love you, Sebastian. I have always loved you. And I love you. His arms tightened around her. Now and forever, Rose, until death parts us, and perhaps beyond. They stood together in the dying firelight, wrapped in each other's arms, two broken people who had somehow found their way home. Outside, the first grey light of dawn was beginning to creep over the London rooftops, heralding a new day, a new beginning. The news of their engagement spread through society like wildfire. The Stone Earl, betrothed at last, and to a widow of questionable reputation, a woman who had once been engaged to him and had broken it off under mysterious circumstances. The gossips were in ecstasy. Sebastian ignored them all. He announced the engagement in the Times, ordered Rosalind a new wardrobe from the finest modiste in London, and commissioned a ring featuring an amber stone the exact colour of her eyes. When anyone dared to question his choice, he fixed them with a stare so cold it could have frozen the Thames, and asked if they would like to repeat themselves. No one ever did. Helena was overjoyed, flinging herself into wedding preparations with an energy Rosalind had not seen from her before. I knew it, she kept saying, her blue eyes sparkling with tears. I knew from the moment you arrived that you were meant to be part of this family. You have brought my brother back to life, Rosalind. I will never be able to repay you. Thomas and Eleanor were equally enthusiastic, though their excitement took more practical forms. Thomas wanted to know if Rosalind would still have adventures with him after she became a countess, and Eleanor demanded to be a flower girl at the wedding. Both requests were readily granted. The wedding itself was a small affair, held in the chapel at Sebastian's country estate 3 weeks after the proposal. Helena served as Rosalind's attendant, Thomas carried the rings with solemn pride, and Eleanor scattered rose petals down the aisle with the gleeful abandon of a child who has been given an important task. Rosalind walked towards Sebastian on Marguerite's arm, her cousin having insisted on giving her away. "Your father would have been proud," Marguerite whispered as they reached the altar. "Not of what he did, never that, but of the woman you have become despite it." "Thank you," Rosalind whispered back, her eyes fixed on Sebastian's face. He stood at the altar in a coat of deep blue, his dark hair neatly combed, his grey eyes soft with an emotion that would once have seemed impossible on the stone earl's face. When Rosalind reached him and placed her hand in his, he raised it to his lips and kissed it, tradition be damned. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he murmured. "You are biased. Utterly. And I always will be." The ceremony was brief but moving, the vows spoken with a weight that came from knowing how easily they might never have been said at all. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Sebastian kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and somewhere in the small crowd of guests, Helena was crying openly. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall of Thornfield, a room that had not seen such joy in years. Sebastian insisted on dancing with his new wife first, leading her through a waltz that cleared the floor as everyone stopped to watch. "They are staring," Rosalind murmured. "Let them stare." Sebastian drew her closer, his hand warm on her waist. "I want the whole world to see how fortunate I am." "Sebastian, I spent 10 years pretending I did not feel anything. 10 years of coldness and distance and walls. Now I intend to feel everything, as publicly as possible, and society can either accept it or go hang." Rosalind laughed, the sound bright and free. "The Stone Earl is truly gone, then?" "Completely. In his place stands a man so ridiculously in love with his wife that he cannot help but make a fool of himself at every opportunity." He spun her through a turn, grinning at her expression. "You have married a romantic, Rose. I hope you are prepared for the consequences." "I think I can manage." "Good, because I intend to write you poetry every day for the rest of our lives. Terrible poetry, most likely, but heartfelt. I shall treasure every word. Even the ones that do not rhyme, especially those." They danced until the music ended, then danced again when it began once more. When at last they were able to escape the celebration, Sebastian led her up the grand staircase and down a corridor to the master suite, where a fire burned in the grate and the bed had been strewn with rose petals. "Helena's doing," Sebastian said, closing the door behind them. "She has been planning this since the moment I told her of the engagement." Rosalind laughed softly, moving to the window to look out at the moonlit gardens below. "I still cannot quite believe it. After everything, after all the years and all the pain, we are actually here, together." Sebastian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Believe it. I intend to spend every day of our marriage reminding you that this is real." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his face. In the firelight, he looked younger somehow, the lines of care and sorrow smoothed away, the warmth in his eyes banishing the last shadows of the Stone Earl. "I love you," she said. "I know I have said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you, Sebastian Ashworth. I have loved you since I was 18 years old, and I will love you until my dying breath. And I love you." He bent to kiss her, soft and slow. "My Rose, my wife, my heart." They did not speak again, for a very long time. 8 years later. The study at Ashworth House was quieter now, the shadows gentler, the fire burning low as evening settled over London. Rosalind paused in the doorway, a soft smile playing on her lips as she watched her husband at his desk. Sebastian was writing. He still kept his head bent in that focused way, his dark hair now shot through with silver at the temples, his features still sharp and handsome despite the years. But the coldness was gone, had been gone for so long that she sometimes forgot it had ever existed. "You will strain your eyes," she said, stepping into the room. He looked up, and his face transformed into the expression that still made her heart flutter after 8 years of marriage, pure, uncomplicated joy at the sight of her. "Rose." He set down his pen and pushed back from the desk, opening his arms in invitation. "Come here." She went to him, settling onto his lap as naturally as breathing, her head finding its familiar resting place against his shoulder. "The children are finally asleep. It took 3 stories, 2 songs, and a solemn promise that you would take them to see the horses tomorrow." "I will take them to see the horses," Sebastian agreed, "and then perhaps to the park, if the weather holds." "You spoil them." "Utterly." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "As I spoil you, as I spoil Helena, as I spoil everyone I love. It is my prerogative as a reformed curmudgeon." Rosalind laughed softly. "No one who knew you now would believe you were ever the Stone Earl. The Stone Earl is a myth, a cautionary tale to frighten young ladies who are considering jilting their fiancés." He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "Speaking of which, I have something to show you." "What is it?" He reached past her to the desk, picking up the paper he had been writing on. "A letter." Rosalind's breath caught as she recognized the format, the familiar opening, the careful script, the way her name was written at the top. "Sebastian, I told you once that I would write you poetry every day for the rest of our lives," he said. "I have not quite managed every day, but I have come close. This is number 2473. She took the letter with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words. It was not poetry, precisely, it was more like a love letter, a chronicle of gratitude and wonder, an accounting of all the small joys of their life together. "My dearest Rose," it began, "this morning I woke to find you gone from our bed, and for one terrible moment I was 18 again, watching you walk away. Then I heard your voice in the nursery, singing to our children, and I remembered that I am the most fortunate man alive. 8 years ago, you came back to me. 8 years ago, you read the letters I had written you a decade before, and you chose to love me again despite everything. I have spent every day since trying to deserve that choice. Today our daughter took her first steps. You were there to catch her when she fell. Tonight, our son asked me what love is, and I told him it is what I feel when I look at his mother. He wrinkled his nose and said that sounded mushy. I told him he would understand someday. I pray he does. Rose. I pray all our children find what we have found, a love strong enough to survive separation, patient enough to wait through years of silence, brave enough to begin again when all seemed lost. You are my heart. You have always been my heart, and I will spend the rest of my days making certain you know it. Yours, in this life and the next. Sebastian. Rosalind looked up from the letter, her eyes bright with tears. You write these to me while I am in the next room, while I am sleeping beside you. You write them as though I might disappear at any moment. Because I remember what it was like when you did. Sebastian cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes so warm now, so full of light holding hers. I remember the silence, the emptiness, the years of wondering if I would ever see you again. I never want to take a single moment with you for granted. I am not going anywhere. I know. He kissed her softly. But I will keep writing anyway, just in case. Rosalind folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bodice, close to her heart. Where do you keep them all? The ones you have written since we married? In the same drawer where I kept the originals. Sebastian glanced toward his desk. The letters you returned are still there too. I could not bring myself to destroy them. Nor should you. She rose from his lap and moved to the desk, pulling open the third drawer. Inside, wrapped in a ribbon, were the 47 letters from a decade past, letters she had read so many times now that she could recite them from memory. And beside them, bundled in stacks tied with blue ribbon, were hundreds more. Thousands of pages covered in Sebastian's handwriting, each one a testament to the love they had almost lost. "The children should have these someday," she said, running her fingers over the worn paper. "They should know how their parents found each other, and lost each other, and found each other again." Perhaps. Sebastian came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Or perhaps we should keep them just for us. A private record of a love that survived everything the world threw at it. You are becoming maudlin in your old age. I am becoming honest. He turned her in his arms to face him. I spent 10 years pretending not to feel. Now I cannot seem to stop. Rosalind laughed, reaching up to smooth a lock of silver-streaked hair from his forehead. "I love you, Sebastian Ashworth. I have loved you since I was a girl of 18, and I will love you when we are both grey and wrinkled and tottering around this house with canes. Is that a promise? It is a vow, more binding than any we spoke in the chapel. Then I shall hold you to it." He bent to kiss her, slow and sweet, a promise of a lifetime still stretching before them. "Come, let us go check on the children." They walked together through the quiet house, hand in hand, pausing at each nursery door to look in on their sleeping children. Margaret, 5 years old, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's grey eyes, lay sprawled across her bed with the utter abandon of childhood. William, 3, was curled in a ball, clutching a stuffed horse that had been a gift from his cousin Thomas. "They are perfect," Rosalind whispered. "They are miracles." Sebastian's voice was soft with wonder. "Every day I look at them and remember that they almost did not exist, that if you had not come back, if we had not found our way to each other again, this life we have built would never have been. But I did come back, and we did find each other." Rosalind squeezed his hand. "And now we have everything, Sebastian. Everything either of us ever wanted." He turned to look at her in the dim light of the corridor, his expression so full of love that it took her breath away. "Not quite everything. I still have not managed to write you a poem that properly rhymes." She laughed, pressing her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound and not wake the children. "I told you I would treasure them regardless. And I told you I would keep trying." He drew her close, his arms wrapping around her with the ease of long familiarity. "Forever, Rose. I will keep trying forever." They stood together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the peaceful breathing of their children and feeling the solid weight of the life they had built together. Outside, the moon rose over London, casting silver light through the windows, illuminating a house that had once been cold and empty, but was now filled with warmth and laughter and love. Rosalind thought of the letters that had started it all, the 47 declarations of love she had returned unopened, never knowing what treasures they contained. She thought of the years of silence, the grief, the guilt, the terrible waste of a decade spent apart. And she thought of what had come after the healing, the forgiveness, the joy that had emerged from the ashes of what they had lost. Some love stories ended in tragedy. Some were snuffed out before they could truly begin. But theirs had survived everything. Separation and silence, grief and guilt, years of emptiness, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. And now, standing in the home they had made together, surrounded by the family they had created, Rosalind knew that every moment of suffering had been worth it. Every returned letter, every sleepless night, every year of wondering and waiting had led them here to this moment, this life, this love that would endure until their last breath and beyond. "Sebastian," she whispered. "Yes, my love?" "Write me another letter tomorrow." He laughed softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I already have. It is in the drawer, waiting for you. Then write me another one after that, and another, until there are so many that our children will need a separate room just to store them all." "That," Sebastian said, his voice full of warmth and wonder and a joy that had taken 10 years to find, "is exactly what I intend to do." They walked together to their chambers, hand in hand, leaving behind the nursery and the study and the drawer full of letters, past, present, and future, all mingled together in a testament to love's endurance. And somewhere in the quiet house, in a desk that had once held only grief and regret, 2,473 love letters sat waiting to be joined by thousands more, each one a small miracle, each one a proof that some loves are strong enough to survive anything, even 10 years of silence. Even 47 letters returned unopened, even the transformation of a stone earl into a man who had finally come home.